I'm going to call it the Josh update, because you're the only one down here who's doing the HSC at the moment. Good job. Hey, everyone feeling good? Yep, feel alive, feel good to be. It's good to see some more rows getting put in and people starting to wake up and come down and be a part of this. We're doing this series called Awake at the moment, where we're talking about waking our souls up again. And the first week we talked about the Emmaus Road. We talked about the fact that Jesus meets us on our road, right? Whatever that road may be. Last week we talked about the fact that sometimes we fall asleep, right? Which a lot of us have done over these past 6 months. We've fallen asleep. That we live in a world that is actually uniquely designed to make us fall asleep, who want us to be quiet, who want us to feel like we don't have anything to say or anything to do. They want us to not be noisy and loud and excited and joyful and graceful and loving and mercy and all these kinds of things, because it's easier to control people that are silent than those that are awake. This week I want to talk about something a little bit different. It's still part of sort of the waking up process, but I want to talk about our expectation levels and what happens when we're expectant, right? So I want you to turn to the person next to you and say, be expectant. And we're going to talk from the Old Testament this morning. I'm going to talk from 1 Samuel 3. And I want to challenge us with this question this morning. When was the last time you were expectant? When was the last time that you were expecting to hear God's call? When was the last time that you were expectant? When was the last time you were expecting to hear God's call? When was the last time? I want you to pinpoint it. I want you to just sort of think, oh, that's a nice question. I want you to actually pinpoint that for me right now. Was it 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Was it 2 months ago? Was it 6 months ago? Was it 2 days ago? Was it today? When was the last time you were expecting to hear God calling you? Not the person around you, not the church, not the pastor, not the preacher, not the worship leader, nothing like that. When was the last time you were expecting God to call you? It's a good question. It's a challenging question for us this morning. When was the last time you were expecting? Expecting. Do you know what the difference between expecting and not expecting is? Here's an illustration. When you are expecting someone to come over to your house, you know when someone rings you up and says, hey, we're going to come over for afternoon tea, we'll be there at 3:30, whatever it is, right? When you're expecting something, what do you do when you're expecting someone? You get ready, yeah? You get the house clean, you get your things in order, you cram everything into that one cupboard that you don't want anyone to ever see, right? You make sure the kids are well behaved, or you at least, you sort of wipe up the blood from when you punched them last, you know what I mean? And you get that out of the way. You mop the floors, you vacuum the floors. Sometimes I've even seen Amy, when people are coming around, she'll pull the fridge out and clean behind the fridge. And I'm like, no one's ever going to see that. But, we do it because we're expecting someone, yes? Isn't it the worst when someone shows up unexpected? And what do? You spend the whole time, the house doesn't usually look like this. The kids don't usually act like that. Usually I'm not in my slippers, right? Usually I've got clothes on. Okay? Something like that. There is a huge difference between expecting someone and not expecting someone. And the reality is, I think we live majority of our lives, right, sort of thinking that God's going to show up unexpectedly, when really we should have the idea that we are preparing our houses and preparing our lives, expecting for God to do something, right? But most of the times we think God's just going to catch us off guard and He's going to do something. We're just going to, we'll just be caught in our slippers. And I don't think that's how this system works all that well. I mean, it does work occasionally, and we see in the Bible where God has unexpectedly come upon people, but there is room, there is space for us to come with an expectation that God is going to do something, to come prepared, to come feeling like God is going to move. That feeling is God's going to encourage us, challenge us, call us. See, there's a difference between being, not expecting someone and expecting someone. I want to ask that question again. When was the last time you were expecting God to call you? We never go to we've got grand final weekend this weekend. We've got all these teams and that happening, and AFL was last night and NRL tonight. No one's buying tickets expecting their team to lose, are they? I mean, you buy a ticket to go to a sporting event with the expectation that your team is going to do well. That's why when teams aren't doing well, ticket sales go down. Yes? Because the expectation of winning is not there anymore, right? You don't buy a movie ticket with the expectation that the movie's going to be bad. Otherwise, you wouldn't buy the ticket. That's why we have movies where there's record ticket sales, because the expectation is high. And then there's movies that do really bad at the box office because the expectation is low. Let me ask you this question. When was the last time you were expecting to hear God's call on your life? But secondly, how did you enter the room today? How did you enter the room today? Did you enter the room expecting God to do something? Or did we enter the room going, another Sunday? Another Sunday. Did we enter the room ready for God to do something in our hearts today? Or did we enter the room kind of just feeling like, I got here? Good. Tick the box. I got here. We've got this kind of situation happening, right? In what we're going to read this morning. We've got this situation happening where there's kind of two sides. And it comes from 1 Samuel chapter 3. It should come up on your screens for you, but I really encourage you in this waking up process that we start to bring our Bibles and open up our Bibles, right? Starts by this. It says, the boy Samuel. Now, Samuel will go on to be one of the great prophets, right? One of the great messengers of the Old Testament. He's kind of big time, right? Everyone say big time. He's got 2 books of the Bible sort of named after him, right? The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. Now, Eli is like the old guard. Eli is like the old priest. Eli is like the guy that's been there before, okay? And he's kind of like I guess he's been there for a long time, but I guess he would be considered as maybe a bit of a failure, maybe a bit of someone that's let the people down, right? He's been in there for too long kind of thing. And so we've got Samuel, the new generation, and we've got Eli, the old guard. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. Everyone say rare. Say it louder, rare. There were not many visions. There were not many visions. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. Hey, I want to encourage you with something this morning. That word rare is the same word as precious, okay? Everyone say precious. So you could, without changing what this is saying, you could actually use precious in place of rare because it's the same word, it's the same meaning. In those days, the word of the Lord was precious. Rare sometimes makes it sound like God was withholding his voice. God was withholding his commands. God was withholding his calling on people's lives. That word rare can sometimes make us assume that it wasn't happening very often. And I would have to say this, that it's not happening very often. It's just that the word of God was not being treated as precious. See, there's a big difference in my view anyway. Somehow I've kind of defined it in my mind like this. There's a difference between hearing something and listening for something. Are you with me? Something about hearing is very passive, right? I can hear something and not necessarily take it in, yeah? So I can hear Amy ask me to do something, but it doesn't necessarily register that I've got to do something about it. Are you with me? Or one of my daughters. Or I could hear a song, but I'm not actually listening. I'm not actually intentively and deliberately listening to the song. When I choose to listen, it means that I'm actively choosing to embrace what you're saying to me and apply it. And to apply it, I say to my children all the time, you heard what I said, you didn't listen to what I said. You heard what I said, but you weren't listening. You heard what I said, but you weren't listening. Because there's a big difference. Listen implies that we are actually wanting to hear what's coming. Listening implies that we actually want to act upon what's coming. Listening implies that we actually hold what's coming as precious and something worth listening to. Hearing is something that happens to us even when we're just passing by. And so I would have to say to you this morning that I don't think verse 1 of this passage is saying that God was withholding his voice, but rather that the word of the Lord was precious and no one was listening. No one was listening. That expectation wasn't there. Are you with me? And so things like visions were down, maybe healings were down, maybe things of the supernatural were down low because no one listened to the word of Lord. No one was listening actively. No one was coming into the room going, something good's going to happen today. No one was expectant. With me? Are you expecting to hear? One person, that's awesome. Are you expecting to hear from God today? Let me ask you a second question. Who's listening? Who's listening? We live in a busy world, yeah? Like, I think I've said this nearly every single year of ministry, but we are living in a world where you do not have to have one more boring minute in your life. In fact, we're living in a world where you don't have to be void of communication or speaking to anyone, ever. Because you could actually, while everyone else is asleep in your house, you could actually be talking to someone else on the other side of the world, like at that time, right? Instantaneously while they're awake. And so you could spend every single minute of your day communicating and talking with someone. But somewhere we've got to break that, and we've got to have these silent moments that allows us to listen to what God might be saying to us. I don't think it's the fact that God's not speaking or that God doesn't have anything to say. I just believe that his people are no longer listening to him. They're no longer opening themselves up and saying, God, what would you have for me today? We're not treating the word of the Lord as precious anymore. You see, when something is rare, it's precious. Correct? You with me? Why do we have all, when like Woolworths and that does Ushies and everyone loses their mind, and all of my community boards on Facebook is everyone posting who has the limited gold edition Ushi of Captain whatever, right? Because they've made a limited amount of those and they've become rare, and because they're rare, somehow we've created this little rubber thing that we stick on the end of our pencils as precious. And God's word is rare, meaning that only very few people actually hear from God, and so we must treat it as precious. And if something is precious, it means that it should get some level of concentration, of priority. When we recognize something as rare, something as precious, it should get a level of priority in our lives. But only few people give the word of the Lord as a priority, is what this is trying to say this morning to us. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. And then verse 2 takes us a little bit further. Are you ready? I'm glad you guys are all ready. One night, Eli, we're back onto Eli, the old guard, the guy that's been around for a while, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see. Notice there it doesn't say because he was old, his eyes were becoming so weak that he could no longer see. I just think that's interesting. The Bible is so descriptive, right? But the writer of this doesn't write, well, because he was so old, his eyes were becoming weak. I just wonder whether his eyes were becoming so weak, right? Because he was losing that preciousness of God's word. I wonder whether that's nothing. Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down, listen to this, in his usual place. That word there, usual place, is an interesting word. Usual. What happens when you ask someone how their week was and they say, it was the usual? What does that mean when we say that? What are we trying to infer when we say that? What are we trying to sort of describe to someone? What we mean is that our week was normal. It was mundane. It was just like the everyday things. I woke up, had breakfast, went to work, got home, cooked dinner, had dinner, went to sleep, woke up, next morning, went to work, all those kinds of things. Nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary, nothing exemplary, like nothing, extraordinary, supernatural, nothing crazy happened this week. It was just the usual, right? Turn the person next to you and say usual, because I feel like you got to wake up a bit. It feels a bit silent in here this morning. It was just the usual, right? It's amazing how much we fall in love with the usual, because the usual is safe. The usual is usually risk-free. The usual means that it is the normal routine and nothing takes me by surprise and I'm in control of my usual. Yes? So we wake up in our usual beds and we get out and we get our usual dressing gown on and we sit down at our usual table and we eat our usual breakfast. And the more you say usual, that is a weird word to say. I dare you to say it 5 times and not go, that's a weird word. Usual. We go to our usual work and we do our usual routine at work and we meet with our usual workmates and then we have our usual lunch. Everything is usual, and usual is good because we control usual. And then we get to the weekend and we sort of freak out a little bit because things are sometimes not so usual because we don't have the usual routine and we try and keep it that way. But then Sunday comes and we have our usual Sunday routine, which is we wear our usual clothes, right? You can't tell me that there's not a place in your wardrobe where it's like, that's my Sunday clothes. I'd usually wear that on Sunday, right? With me? Like just that little section there, I've got that. All my shirts I wear on Sunday, these are the ones. With me? And when I come to church, I sit in my usual place. You all know it because most of you are sitting in your usual places right now. Yes? Everything's usual. And Eli is missing out because he's sitting and sleeping in his usual place. Usual is usually ritualistic, restrictive, and not very relational. See, when we live in the usual, it often restricts us from hearing the precious word of God, the precious call of God, right? When we live in the usual, it often becomes ritualistic and it becomes, this is just what I do. This is just what I do. And I'm not saying God can't work through your rituals and God can't work through your usual, but what I am trying to say is that sometimes we become so rigid in our motions that we are just hearing things and not actively listening. Have you ever driven a car before? Say you're dropping kids off at school or you're going to work and you drive all the way there, and when you park and pull up, you sit at the steering wheel for a moment and you go, you know what? Not once in that car trip did I actively engage with what I was doing. Have you ever done that, or is that just me, right? Have you ever not just pulled up somewhere and gone, man, I didn't even think about driving just then. I just somehow got here, right? See, what's happened there is that that's a usual process. That's something you have done again and again and again and again and again, and you don't have to think about it anymore. And so it's quite dangerous because you're actually not engaging with anything around you. And our lives can become such the same that God may be speaking to you in your usual, but because you're just so used to doing what you're doing, you're not actually listening or looking out for God to speak in your life. Is anyone with me this morning? I feel like I'm speaking to myself on the screen here, and that's all I'm looking at, right? So let's get a little bit noisier in here for me this morning, just to encourage me a little bit and get us down on this, right? He was lying down in his usual place. While ever you lie down in your usual, you have the potential of missing out on the unique. While ever you lie down in your usual, you have the potential of missing out on the unique. We've got to start moving ourselves. We've got to start breaking the usual in our lives. If you are going to limit yourself to the usual, you will always miss out on the unique. And God is in the unique. God is always doing things that are unique, creative, dynamic, transformational. If things are unique all the time, if things are usual all the time, we might miss out on the unique. Or we might just hear about it from time to time, but we never experience it. Eli, for whatever reason in his life, has chosen to lie down in his usual place. Verse 3, though, is where this all breaks down for us, and it's where the challenge is this morning, right? Verse 3, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. I love that saying. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. Do you remember last week when we talked about Paul, when the guy fell asleep, right? Because of all the fire and the flames and and Paul speaking for hours and hours, and he fell out of the window and he died, yes? And he's on the ground and everyone sort of goes down to see him, and Paul sort of comes down, and what does he say? He says, don't be afraid, don't worry. There is life yet in him. That's pretty cool. And that's kind of the same sentence as what's happening here. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. There was a literal lamp in God's Holy of Holies, right? In the tent, in the temple, that burned 24/7. And what I would say is when we read on in this verse, the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, right? Where the ark of God was. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord. I believe that lamp used to have to burn 24/7. It used to always have to be on, because whenever the fire was on, that meant God was there. And I'm just sort of guessing. I'm not really sure on this one. I'm sure there might be someone watching who will correct me or whatever. You can send it to idon'tcare.com. I'm pretty sure that Samuel, his job would have been to keep the light alit. Do you get what I'm saying? Because you always get the younger crew, you always get the apprentice, which Samuel was to Eli, to do the jobs you don't want to do. Eli didn't want to get up in the night and make sure that the lamp was still burning. So let's give it to the young guy. And the young guy strategically placed himself in a position in the house of God in order to keep the lamp burning, right? What's interesting to me is that sometimes we throw the responsibility on God and say, God, it's your responsibility to keep the fire burning. And God says, no. It's your responsibility to live a life that uniquely keeps this lamp burning. It's your responsibility to wake up and make sure it's still lit. It's your responsibility to wake up routinely and make sure that the lamp of God has not yet gone out. And listen, here's what I want to say to you. The lamp of God, that fire is never, ever going to be extinguished. That's the trust part that comes with God. He is going to keep that thing burning all the way into eternity and forevermore, right? But we allow it to go out. And the reason why we allow it to go out is because we lie in usual places and we refuse to come with expectant hearts. We lie in usual places and we refuse to enter this place with expectant hearts. Let me say it one more time for you this morning. It's because we lie in usual places and we refuse to come with expectant hearts. The difference between Eli and Samuel is this. Eli is probably old at this time, no doubt, right? But Eli has allowed himself to fall into routine, ritual, and usual places. Samuel is young and hungry and ready to hear from God. Do you remember when I asked you, when was the last time you heard that call on your life? Yes? Remember that last time when you heard God call you to do something, or God call you closer to Him, or God gave you something very specific to do? Do you remember how young and vibrant and in your spirit, maybe not physically, because I don't know when that happened for everyone, but do you remember how just on fire you felt in that moment, and you had bound endless energy? You just had this ability to keep going. And so running that small group or that open house was nothing for you because you had all this energy ready to go, right? Turning up to church early and actually pouring yourself out into people and encouraging people, that was nothing for you because you were young and you were hungry and you were ready to go. Somewhere along the line, we moved from being Samuel's to Eli's, where we just got tired. And I got to tell you, that's not because God has let you down. It's not because God has failed you. It's not because God has put the lamp out in your life. It's because we've lied in usual places. It's because we've become mundane in our routines. It's because we've allowed usual things, safe things, to override the unique, the sometimes scary choices that we've got to make. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, right? It was precious. There were not many visions, right? But, that second sentence, there were not many visions, you could also say there were not many listening. There were not many listening, right? One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord. He was lying down where God was, right? in the house of the Lord. And if you don't believe that that's what that sentence means, where the ark of God was. The writer even becomes more specific than that, and he says, see, because wherever the ark of the covenant, wherever the ark of God was, that's where God was. Samuel has got himself so close to God, physically, in preparation to hear him. He's not settling for usual places. He's not settling for the routine and the ritualistic and the non-relational. He is strategically placing himself ready for God to speak. And then it says this, then the Lord called Samuel. Verse 4, the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel answered, here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. I just want to challenge us to something this morning, okay? Because I've been a little bit harsh on Eli this morning. I've been a little bit harsh on his usualness. Because there is a difference in this story. There's Eli, the old guard, right? The ones that have run the church. And then there's this new generation. I've been talking about the next generation for a long time here. Well over a year now, that we've got to be a church that sees the next generation coming and empowers them to do so, right? So here's Eli, the one that's eyes are weakened, who's lying in his usual place and doesn't want to do the normal things anymore. And here's Samuel, the young, hungry lion who's ready to hear from God and ready to take on the world. And Samuel doesn't recognize the voice of God straight away, does he? He hears his name Samuel and he thinks it's Eli, so he runs to Eli. And Eli says, I didn't call you, and he goes back to bed. And then God calls him again. I'm not going to read it. God calls him again, and Samuel gets up and he goes to Eli, and Eli says, hey, I didn't call you, right? Again, the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and he went to Eli and he said to him, here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I did not call you. Go back and lie down. Now, verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him, right? So he didn't understand where this was coming from. And a third time, the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and he went to Eli and he said, here I am, you called me. Listen to this. Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, go and lie down. And if he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. The new generation needs the old generation to help them understand when it is the Lord that's calling them. You with me? Not sure you guys are. If the old guard does not pour into the new generation is going to be misguided as to when God is calling them. And if they are misguided as to when God is calling them, they might place their faith and their hope in the old guard rather than God. Isn't that what Samuel's doing here? He's running to Eli because Eli is his only, it's his only north. It's his only basis of knowing who God is, right? And that's not correct. The new generation doesn't need to come back to us to work out who God is. God is very good in pouring himself into the new generation and empowering them to reach their generation to the best way that they can. It is our job to keep redirecting that new generation that's coming through and saying to them, it's God who's calling you, you need to do it. It's God who's calling you, you need to do it. And listen, old guard, because I'm starting to find that I'm starting to slip into that old guard point, right? Because there's things I look at and I go, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, right? Have you ever said that to yourselves? Oh, I wouldn't have done that. And I constantly find myself doing that. Oh, I wouldn't have done that. But just because you don't understand something doesn't mean it's not right. And just because you don't get it, and just because you wouldn't have done it that way, doesn't mean God doesn't want to do it through that way. We've got to start empowering and trusting the next generation that God is calling them just as much as he's called us. I mean, this is not even part of my message today. I just feel like saying this, right? Because so many of us, we sort of turn our noses up to the next generation and go, oh, well, they don't get it. Well, the reason why they don't get it is because we haven't shown it. I mean, I've heard people say, oh, well, they just don't understand it, or they just don't understand commitment. Well, maybe it's because they haven't seen commitment in us. Well, they don't know how to pray, so how can we let them, Well, maybe they've not seen us pray. Well, they don't understand what it is to have a dynamic relationship with God, because it's not just about the songs we sing. Well, maybe they haven't seen a dynamic relationship with God because we haven't shown them. So we're blaming a generation for something we haven't shown them. It's unrealized expectations. And it's time for the new generation to get out, the old generation, to get out of its usual place and reignite that flame again in their lives, and then pour into the next generation who is the church. Right? The next generation of our church is the Joshes. It is the Declans. It is the Chantals. It is that generation that we've got to be pouring into, and they need an Eli. But what we do is that we sort of pull out and we go, hey, Sean, Julie, can you guys run that for us? Good, you guys are running that so we can keep singing our songs. And we can keep the usual happening. We've got to start breaking this down, and we've got to start intercrossing it together, and we've got to start saying there should always be someone mentoring me, and I should always be mentoring someone. Because you know what? The Joshes and the Declans and the Chantals and the whoever else is, right? Those guys are then going to take on the Bethanies and the Zachs. You with me? And the Ezekiels and the Tianas and the Sophias and all this next generation. And then that generation is going to take on the next generation. And if we do not pull our heads out now and wake up, there is going to be this void sitting here of people who aren't listening. And even if, listen, because here's the thing, Samuel did everything right, didn't he? He was lying in the house of the Lord. He was coming in with expectation, but even when, and he was listening for the Lord's word, but even when he listened, he still got it wrong. He needed that help. And so we can do all the right things. We can come with expectation. We can come with this feeling of God's going to speak today, but unless someone else is speaking to us and saying, that's the Lord, you need to do this. This is your next step. It's all null and void. So he could, if he wanted to, hear the word of the Lord, but he needed that guidance. So it's a twofold challenge today. The first challenge is this: are we just lying in usual places? Are you just doing usual things? Or do you need to sort of kind of step out of something here today and sort of go, God, wake me up. That flame is not out yet. I need to reignite it. I need to move forward. Maybe it's physical. I don't know. Like maybe you got to start bringing your Bible to church. Maybe it's something like that that's just so simple. Maybe it's just moving seats. Maybe it's saying hello to someone different. I don't know what it is right for you this morning. Maybe it's more dynamic than that as well. Maybe it's a little bit more like multi-layered. Maybe it's like I have to wake up an hour earlier and I have to read the Bible. Listen, a lot of people say to me, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. You will do what's important to you. Right? So if the word of the Lord is rare and precious, if you can acknowledge that the word of the Lord is rare and precious, you'll get up an hour earlier. You'll get up 2 hours earlier. You'll get up 3 hours earlier. If it's precious to you. If it's not, you won't. Simple. If it's not, you won't. But maybe that's what some people have to do. Maybe today it's just like I just have to release myself in worship, and I have to allow myself to connect again, that spirit to his spirit, and hear what God is saying to me. Whatever it is today, maybe it's a withholding of encouragement. You know what I'm learning more and more? The more I encourage, the more I feel God moving through me. When I speak words of affirmation, of encouragement, of love, of mercy, of grace, or whatever it is, I can feel God working through that, which means I'm listening to him more because I want that more. Does that make sense? It's time for us to start removing ourselves from our usual places, and it's time for us to start lying where God is. It's time for us to not enter this room in the usual manner, but to enter this room with an expectation that I will never be the same again. Can you not see the difference? Do we not understand the difference this morning? It's not about what the band produces. It's not about what the speaker says. It's not about whether the room is aesthetically pleasing. It's about the heart that comes and whether it's expecting or unexpected. We're either an Eli or we are a Samuel. And listen, we need some more Elis that are speaking into some Samuels. We need some more Elis. Can't be just the guy with the mic, and it can't be just the person on a Friday night. We need some more Eli's speaking into some Samuels. You need to position better to listen better. Get out of your usualness. Get out of the routine. Get out of the ritual. Start coming before God and saying, don't let this lamp go out. Can I pray for you this morning? Why don't we all stand? Personally, I mean, that message could go on for ages because I don't think we throw out disciplines either. But what I'm here to say is that COVID did a really good job at putting us all to sleep. And some of us are basing our decisions now on the new usual, the new normal, as I'm hearing these days. So we'll sort of sit in the online, or we'll sit, we'll watch or we'll catch up later in the week when it gets uploaded or whatever it is. But remember what I said? We do hard things. Following God is hard. Following Jesus is hard. You got to choose what your heart is. So I want to challenge us. I want to pray for you. We do this every service. All eyes closed, all heads bowed. It's super important that we understand first and foremost that the word of the Lord is precious. It's precious. It's rare. And it's not that God's withholding, it's just that we're not listening. So maybe the starting point today is this. When I enter into this place, I come with an expectation that He is going to do something in my life, that He's going to say something, that He's going to challenge me to something, He's going to call me to something, that He's going to pull me closer to Him. Maybe that's the first challenge, that we're going to break usual places today. But maybe there's that second thing too today, which is going to cost us. It's going to cost us to see that there is a new generation of Samuels that are coming through that need an older generation of Eli's who are saying, the next time you hear that, the next time they mention it, and the next time you feel that happening within your heart, you need to say, here I am, God. I'm listening. And then that Eli, what I love is Eli gets out of the way and he allows God to do what He's going to do. Can we see the pattern here? Can we see? So maybe the breaking of your usual place is actually pouring into the next generation. Or maybe it's even more simple than that. No one ever buys a ticket to a sporting event expecting their team to lose. Why do we enter into church expecting God to do nothing? It's time for us to come with expectant hearts. Let me pray for you. All eyes closed, all heads bowed. We do this every single service. If this morning you're here and you're like, you know what? Usual places, I want to break that. Expectant hearts, I want to embrace that. Why don't you just raise your hand for me? And if you're watching online, you can like it or you can send a message or do whatever you want to do to sort of recognize that. We'll be praying for you as well. But all eyes closed, all heads bowed, I want to come with an expectant heart. Let's just make that our basis today. I want to come with an expectant heart. God, you can do anything, and I'm here and I'm ready for you to call me. And you know what? Some Sundays, He might not call us. But that does not mean the lamp is out, and that does not mean it's done. It could mean that He still needs you to do what He asked you to do last time. Or it could mean that He's like, hey, you know what? You're all good. I'm all good. Let's just enjoy each other's presence, right? I don't know what it means, but all I'm trying to say is that our hearts is what needs to change here, an expectant heart. God, right now, for the hands that are raised and for those that are watching home online, for the hands that are raised there or the hearts that are open right now, I pray that we would have expectant hearts. So God, whether it is next week when we come through this room, that we would come in here and we would say, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to do what you ask. I'm ready to be called by you. Whether it's next week when we're opening up our iPad or opening up our laptop and we're mirroring it to our TV screens and we're getting ready and we're seeing the countdown happen, that we would look at that screen and we would say, I'm ready, God, I'm ready. I'm ready for something to change my life. I'm ready for something to challenge me, to encourage me, to stretch me. I'm ready for your call. God, just enable us right now, empower us right now to say, I need an expectant heart. That I would not lie down in usual places, but I would lie down where the Lord is. And I would listen to what he has for me. And I would do what I listen to. God, there's others that maybe haven't been lying down in usual places, who are feeling good, who are expectant, but God, maybe the next step is that there are Samuels in our lives that we've got to start pouring into, that we've sort of got to help direct and sort of say, you know what, that's God speaking. You need to do what God tells you to do. You need to go where God shows you. You need to love how God shows you. Give us wisdom, give us discernment right now. And God, even for those in the room and those watching at home right now, I pray that God, we would even enter into this last song together with expectant hearts, that you're going to do something in our lives. All this, Lord, we give you the glory. Amen.